Never get angry or bothered by anyone. Have you ever noticed how some people remain unshaken amid chaos while others crumble at the slightest inconvenience? The difference isn't luck or circumstance. It's something far more powerful. It's the profound understanding that happiness and emotional stability come from within. When someone cuts you off in traffic, spills coffee on your new shirt, or speaks to you disrespectfully, what happens in that split second before you react? There's a tiny space, a moment of choice, that determines whether you'll spend the next minutes, hours, or even days in anger or peace. This space is where your power lives. The ancient wisdom that happiness depends upon ourselves isn't just a beautiful philosophy. It's a practical truth about how our minds function. Every emotional reaction you experience begins not with external events, but with your interpretation of those events. The driver didn't make you angry. Your boss didn't ruin your day. These are choices you make, often unconsciously, but choices nonetheless. Consider two people experiencing identical situations. Both are stuck in an hour-long delay at the airport. One fumes, paces, checks their watch repeatedly, and snaps at the airline staff. The other uses the time to read, calls a friend they've been meaning to catch up with, or simply observes the fascinating theater of human behavior around them. Same circumstance, dramatically different experiences, all because of internal choices. This isn't about suppressing emotions or plastering on a fake smile. It's about recognizing that you possess the ultimate authority over your emotional landscape. When you truly understand this, it becomes impossible for anyone to make you angry without your permission. Think about the people you admire most. Aren't they often those who maintain composure under pressure? Those who respond rather than react? They weren't born with this ability. They developed it through the conscious recognition that their emotions belong to them alone. The most liberating aspect of this wisdom is how it transforms your relationships. When you stop blaming others for your feelings, you reclaim your power. The colleague who always pushes your buttons suddenly loses their influence. The family member whose comments used to trigger you now seems less threatening. You begin to see that their behavior reveals more about them than it does about you. But how do you begin this transformation? Start by becoming a witness to your reactions. The next time you feel anger rising, pause. Notice the physical sensations, the tightening in your chest, the heat in your face, the quickening of your breath. Simply observing these responses creates distance between you and the emotion. From this space, you can ask, is this reaction serving me? Is it proportionate to what's happening? Am I choosing this response? Or is it choosing me? This practice doesn't happen overnight. Like any worthwhile skill, it requires patience and persistence. You'll fail often, catching yourself mid-reaction rather than before it, or perhaps only recognizing patterns hours later. Each awareness is progress. Each recognition builds your emotional muscle memory. As you develop this self-awareness, you'll discover something remarkable. The people and situations that once seemed designed to provoke you begin to lose their power, not because they've changed, but because you have. The driver who cuts you off becomes just another human having a rush day. The rude cashier becomes someone possibly struggling with unseen battles. Your reactive anger transforms into responsive understanding. The ultimate freedom comes when you realize that no one can dictate your emotional state without your consent. This doesn't mean you'll never feel angry. Anger has its place as a natural human emotion. But there's a world of difference between experiencing anger consciously and being controlled by it unconsciously. Remember this. In every interaction, you bring your emotional history, assumptions, and interpretations. So does everyone else. When you take responsibility for your side of this equation, you gain the superpower of emotional choice. Happiness. True, sustainable contentment cannot be found in controlling others, changing circumstances, or acquiring possessions. It emerges from the profound recognition that you alone hold the keys to your emotional kingdom. This is both a responsibility and a gift. Practice this wisdom daily and watch as the world transforms before your eyes, not because it has changed, but because you have. Lesson 1. Quality is not an act. When we think about controlling our anger or remaining unbothered by others, we often imagine it as a moment of heroic willpower, a singular act of restraint when someone pushes our buttons. We picture ourselves taking a deep breath, counting to 10, or walking away from a heated situation. While these tactics can be useful in the moment, they miss a fundamental truth. Emotional mastery is not achieved through isolated acts of restraint, but through the cultivation of consistent habits. Consider the difference between someone who occasionally manages not to explode in anger versus someone who rarely feels the impulse to explode at all. The first person is performing an act. The second person has developed a habit. The quality of emotional regulation that allows you to move through life unperturbed is not something you do occasionally. It's something you become. Our brains are remarkable pattern recognition machines. Each time you react with anger to a situation, you strengthen neural pathways that make that same reaction more likely in the future. Conversely, each time you respond with patience, curiosity, or compassion, you build alternative pathways. Over time, these pathways become your default settings, your habits. Think about learning to play a musical instrument. At first, each note requires conscious thought and deliberate placement of your fingers. The sound may be awkward, even jarring, but with practice, your fingers seem to know where to go without conscious direction. The music flows naturally. Emotional regulation works the same way. What initially feels like an effortful override of your natural reactions gradually becomes your new nature. The ancients understood this principle deeply. They recognized that virtues like patience, equanimity, and compassion aren't inborn traits, but cultivated qualities that become second nature through practice. They knew that what you do repeatedly shapes who you become. This perspective transforms how we approach situations that typically trigger our anger. Instead of seeing each provocation as a test to pass or fail, we can view it as practice, another opportunity to strengthen our emotional muscles. The rude driver who cuts you off in traffic isn't just an annoyance. They're providing you with a valuable training opportunity. Think of emotional triggers as resistance training for your mind. Just as weights provide resistance that builds physical strength, difficult people and situations provide resistance that builds emotional strength. Each repetition makes you stronger, not because the weight gets lighter, but because you become more capable. The beauty of this approach is that it removes the pressure of perfection. You don't have to respond perfectly to every situation. You just need to practice consistently, knowing that the quality of your responses will improve over time. Some days the practice will feel easy. Other days it will challenge you immensely. Both are necessary parts of the process. Starting this practice requires awareness of your current emotional habits. What situations reliably trigger your anger? What physical sensations precede your emotional reactions? What thoughts typically accompany your feelings of being bothered or disturbed? This awareness creates space between stimulus and response, space where new habits can be formed. Then, choose simple practices to implement consistently. Perhaps you commit to pausing for 3 breaths before responding to criticism. Or maybe you practice reframing others' actions with the assumption of good intentions or human fallibility rather than malice. Whatever practice you choose, commit to it as a daily discipline rather than an occasional technique. Habits form most effectively when tied to specific contexts or triggers. If being criticized in meetings typically angers you, the context becomes your dedicated practice ground. Every meeting becomes an opportunity to implement your new response pattern until it becomes automatic. The transformation from reactive to responsive doesn't happen overnight. Neural pathways established over decades don't rewire themselves in a day. But with consistent practice, what once required tremendous effort gradually becomes effortless. The person who once had to fight to control their anger eventually finds that calmness is their natural state. Quality emotional regulation is not about white-knuckling your way through provocations. It's about transforming your relationship to those provocations through consistent practice until responding thoughtfully becomes easier than reacting emotionally. It's about building habits so deeply ingrained that they become who you are rather than what you do. In the journey toward never being angered or bothered by anyone, remember that quality is not an act, it's a habit. And habits, once firmly established, can last a lifetime. Lesson 2. The ideal man bears the accidents of life with dignity and grace. Life rarely unfolds according to our plans. You wake up expecting one kind of day, and by sunset, you've lived through something entirely different. It's in these unexpected moments, when someone cuts you off in traffic, when a colleague takes credit for your work, when a friend makes a hurtful comment, that your character is most clearly revealed. Consider how often you've witnessed someone completely unravel over a minor inconvenience. Perhaps it was a delayed flight, a spilled coffee, or a misunderstood text message. These small frustrations can trigger explosive reactions that leave lasting damage. But what separates those who crumble under pressure from those who remain composed? The answer lies in dignity and grace, two qualities that transform how you experience life's inevitable challenges. Dignity comes from knowing your inherent worth isn't diminished by someone else's behavior. When you possess this understanding, you stop interpreting others' actions as personal attacks. The driver who cut you off wasn't making a statement about your value. They were likely distracted or running late. Your colleague who interrupted you in a meeting wasn't declaring your ideas worthless. They were possibly eager or unaware of proper etiquette. Grace, meanwhile, is the outward expression of this inner dignity. It's how you respond when tested, how you carry yourself when provoked. Grace isn't weakness. It's tremendous strength channeled through restraint. Anyone can explode in anger. Few can respond with measured wisdom when their emotions are screaming for release. You've likely encountered someone who embodies these qualities. Perhaps it was a manager who received harsh criticism without becoming defensive, instead asking thoughtful questions to understand the feedback better. Or maybe it was a friend who, when wrongfully accused, calmly clarified the situation without escalating tensions. These people aren't free from anger. They simply refuse to let it dictate their actions. Practicing grace requires understanding that most people behave poorly, not out of malice, but from their own suffering. The colleague who consistently undermines you may be battling deep insecurity. The family member who criticizes your choices might be projecting their own regrets. This perspective doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does liberate you from taking it personally. Consider implementing a momentary pause when provoked. In that brief space between stimulus and response lies your freedom. Ask yourself, will my reaction improve this situation or merely satisfy a temporary urge to express frustration? Often, the wisest response isn't the first one that comes to mind. Maintaining composure isn't just about appearing unruffled. It's about preserving your internal peace. When you react with hostility, you're the one who experiences the damaging physiological effects of stress hormones flooding your system. You're the one who carries the emotional burden long after the interaction ends. Life will inevitably present you with difficult people and challenging circumstances. You'll encounter people who seem determined to test your patience, situations that appear designed to provoke your worst reactions. In these moments, recall that how you respond says nothing about them and everything about you. The path to mastering this approach isn't linear. You'll have days when grace comes easily and others when maintaining composure feels impossible. Progress isn't measured by perfection, but by improvement, by handling today's provocations slightly better than yesterday's. Making the best of circumstances doesn't mean pretending difficulties don't exist. Rather, it means approaching them with a constructive mindset. When faced with a problem, ask, "What can I learn here? How might this challenge help me grow?" This perspective transforms obstacles from mere annoyances into opportunities. The true power of bearing life's accidents with dignity and grace lies in its effect on your overall well-being. Those who master this approach experience greater peace, stronger relationships, and more effective problem-solving abilities. They waste less energy on emotional reactivity and have more available for what truly matters. So when you next find yourself tested, when someone disappoints you, when circumstances frustrate you, when life doesn't unfold as expected, remember that your response defines you more clearly than whatever provoked it. Choose dignity. Choose grace. Choose to be the person who makes the best of circumstances rather than being diminished by them. Lesson 3. Fear is pain arising from the anticipation of evil. Have you ever noticed how your anger often emerges not from what's actually happening, but from what you fear might happen? This phenomenon lies at the heart of our most intense emotional reactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, your immediate surge of rage isn't simply about the action itself. It's about the near accident you imagine could have occurred. Your mind quickly painted a catastrophic picture, and your body responded accordingly. Fear and anger are intimate companions, two sides of the same emotional coin. While fear makes us retreat, anger propels us forward, but both emerge from the same root: anticipated harm. Understanding this connection is your first step toward freedom from reactivity. Consider how often your angriest moments begin with anticipatory thoughts. They're going to disappoint me again. This person is trying to take advantage of me. Or I'll look foolish if I don't stand my ground. Before reality has a chance to unfold, your mind has already constructed an elaborate threat narrative, priming your emotional system for battle. The wisdom of ancient philosophers reveals a profound truth. This anticipation of evil, not the actual events, causes our greatest suffering. When you find yourself growing angry at someone, pause and ask, "What am I afraid will happen here?" Often, you'll discover your anger is merely a protective shield against deeper fears of rejection, disrespect, failure, or vulnerability. Your brain evolved with this predictive capacity to keep you safe, constantly scanning for potential threats. In primitive environments, this served you well. But in modern social contexts, this same mechanism creates unnecessary battles by treating minor slights as survival threats. Your defensive anger emerges as protection against something that rarely materializes as severely as you imagine. Here's a practice that can transform your relationship with anger. When you feel that familiar heat rising, take 3 deep breaths and mentally trace the feeling back to its source. Is it truly about the person before you, or about what their actions symbolize? Are you reacting to reality or to your mind's projection of possible negative outcomes? Take Alex, who would explode with rage whenever his partner was late. Through reflection, he discovered his anger wasn't about punctuality, it was fear speaking. Each delay triggered childhood memories of waiting for parents who sometimes didn't show up, awakening dormant abandonment fears. Once recognized, these fears lost their power to hijack his emotions. His anticipatory pain dissolved, and with it, his reflexive anger. Similarly, Maria would become furious when colleagues questioned her ideas at work. The anger protected her from a deeper fear, that she wasn't truly qualified for her position. By recognizing this fear of inadequacy, she could address it directly rather than through defensive rage. The most liberating realization is that most anticipated catastrophes never materialize. Your mind is an expert at constructing worst-case scenarios that rarely reflect the full range of possibilities. When you react with anger to these imagined futures, you're fighting shadows. Practice redirecting your mental energy from what might go wrong to what might go right. When someone's behavior triggers your anger, challenge yourself to imagine 3 positive or neutral explanations for their actions. This creates mental flexibility where rigid fear once dominated. Fear-based anger keeps you perpetually on edge, scanning for confirmation of your negative expectations. This hypervigilance exhausts your mental resources and blinds you to the beauty and opportunity present in each moment. By recognizing when you're responding to anticipated threats rather than actual harm, you free yourself from needless suffering. The ancient wisdom remains relevant. Anticipatory pain creates more suffering than the events themselves. By developing awareness of how your fears generate anger, you gain the power to respond rather than react. You begin to see others not as threats to be defended against, but as fellow travelers equally guided by their own fears and hopes. Your liberation from anger begins with this recognition. Most of what you fear never comes to pass. And even when difficulties arise, they rarely match the catastrophes your mind so vividly constructed. In releasing anticipatory fear, you discover the peaceful clarity that has always existed beneath the turbulent surface of reactive emotions. Lesson 4. Hope is a waking dream. The essence of never being bothered by others lies in how we frame our expectations and hopes. When someone cuts you off in traffic, snaps at you for no reason, or deliberately tries to provoke you, what determines your response isn't the event itself, but the framework of hope you've constructed around human interactions. Hope is indeed a waking dream. It colors our reality without our conscious awareness. When we hope that others will behave reasonably, that our day will unfold smoothly, or that people will recognize our efforts, we set ourselves up for potential distress when these expectations aren't met. Yet hope, properly understood, can become our greatest shield against provocation. Consider what happens when someone insults you. The immediate sting comes not just from their words, but from the collapse of your implicit hope that you would be treated with respect. The gap between expectation and reality creates the emotional charge that powers anger. But what if your hope was more resilient and less brittle? The ancients understood that hope should not be passive wishfulness, but active preparation for multiple possibilities. They cultivated what we might call resilient hope, a forward-looking optimism tempered by realistic understanding of human nature. This kind of hope doesn't break when tested. It bends and adapts. When you encounter someone determined to anger you, their power exists only to the extent that they can shatter your hopes about how you should be treated. But if your hope transcends immediate circumstances, if it's grounded in your own character rather than others' behavior, their provocations lose their force. Think of encounters with difficult people as opportunities to practice this transcendent hope. When a colleague takes credit for your work, instead of hoping they'll be exposed or punished, hope instead that you'll respond with integrity regardless of their actions. This shifts your emotional center of gravity from what you can't control to what you can. This perspective transforms how you experience provocation. The driver who dangerously cuts you off is no longer ruining your hope for a peaceful commute. They're providing an opportunity to strengthen your hope of becoming someone unshakable in character. The insult hurled your way becomes not an attack on your dignity, but a chance to demonstrate that your dignity was never actually at their mercy. Hope as a waking dream means we shape our emotional reality through what we choose to anticipate and value. If you hope merely for comfort, convenience, and universal approval, you've crafted a fragile dream easily shattered by reality. But if you hope for growth, understanding, and the development of your character, even the most challenging interactions become meaningful parts of your journey. When practicing this approach, start with small irritations. Notice how your hopes form the lens through which you view minor inconveniences. Does a delayed delivery disappoint you because you hoped for prompt service? Or does it become insignificant because your deeper hope is to develop patience? Practice consciously reframing your hopes in these small moments, and you'll build the strength for larger challenges. What makes hope powerful is not its intensity, but its direction. Hoping intensely that others won't bother you makes you vulnerable to their actions. Hoping instead to develop an unperturbable character regardless of provocation makes you increasingly immune to disturbance. The truly remarkable aspect of this practice is how it transforms your relationship with hope itself. Rather than experiencing dashed hopes as painful losses, you begin to see them as redirections toward deeper fulfillment. You learn that hope isn't just about preferred outcomes, but about the meaning you assign to all outcomes. As you cultivate this form of hope, you'll notice something surprising. People seem less able to provoke you, not because they've changed, but because your emotional response system has evolved. What once triggered immediate defense or offense now triggers curiosity, compassion, or even amusement. Your hope, your waking dream, has become resilient enough to incorporate the full range of human behavior without being disturbed by it. This is the true power of hope as a waking dream. In this way, hope becomes not just a pleasant emotion, but a practical tool for navigating a world where others will inevitably try to disturb your peace. Lesson 5. The ideal man bears the accidents of life with dignity and grace. Life rarely unfolds according to our plans. You wake up determined to have a perfect day, and suddenly your colleague takes credit for your work. A driver cuts you off in traffic, or someone makes a dismissive comment about your ideas. These moments test your emotional fortitude and reveal your true character. The ideal response isn't to become a doormat or explode with rage. It's to bear these accidents of life with dignity and grace. Consider the oak tree in a violent storm. It doesn't fight against every gust of wind. It bends and sways while its deep roots hold firm. This is precisely how you must approach the provocations of daily life. When someone tests your patience, they're like the storm, temporary, passing, and ultimately not in control of how you grow. The first key to maintaining dignity during challenging interactions is to separate the event from your interpretation of it. When someone speaks harshly to you, there are multiple perspectives available. You can see it as a personal attack deserving of retaliation, or you can recognize that troubled waters rarely reflect clearly. Most harsh words come from people who are themselves suffering, stressed, or insecure. By recognizing this, you transform potential conflict into an opportunity for compassion. You cannot control others' behavior, but you absolutely control your response. This response determines the trajectory of every interaction. When you respond with anger to someone's provocation, you hand them control over your emotional state. Is that power they deserve to have? By responding with composed dignity, you maintain sovereignty over your emotions while demonstrating strength far greater than reactive anger. Grace under pressure isn't just admirable, it's strategic. Consider how differently people perceive someone who remains composed versus someone who becomes visibly agitated. The composed person commands respect. Their calmness emanates authority. Meanwhile, the agitated person broadcasts vulnerability and lack of control. Which would you rather be? This doesn't mean suppressing genuine emotions. Rather, it means processing them wisely. When you feel anger rising, take a breath and create space between stimulus and response. Ask yourself, will reacting emotionally serve my higher purposes? Will I respect myself more tomorrow for how I handle this today? Often the answer reveals that dignity serves you better than momentary emotional release. Making the best of circumstances doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the most dignified response is setting a clear boundary. The difference lies in how you establish that boundary, with reactionary anger or with calm, unwavering resolve. The latter carries immeasurably more power and effectiveness. Practice this approach in small daily irritations. When someone interrupts you, rather than becoming visibly annoyed, pause deliberately before continuing with greater clarity. When faced with criticism, respond not with defensive justification but with curious engagement. That's interesting. Could you tell me more about your perspective? These small interactions build your capacity for grace under greater pressures. Your response to life's accidents becomes part of your personal narrative. Years from now, you won't remember most provocations, but you will remember how you conducted yourself during challenging moments. Will your story be one of someone whose emotional state was at the mercy of others, or someone who maintained inner sovereignty, regardless of external circumstances? The truly powerful person isn't the one who can make others feel small, but the one who remains whole regardless of how others behave. This is dignity in action, the capacity to stand firmly in your worth without needing to diminish others, even when provoked. The next time someone tests your patience, see it as an invitation to practice this noble art. Respond not as they might expect or even deserve, but as the person you aspire to be. In doing so, you transform potential conflicts into opportunities for demonstrating excellence of character. The dignity with which you face life's accidents becomes not just a strategy for handling difficult people, but a cornerstone of a life well lived. Lesson 6. The ideal man bears the accidents of life with dignity and grace. Life is an unpredictable journey, filled with moments that test our patience, challenge our composure, and sometimes push us to the edge of our emotional limits. Consider the driver who cuts you off in traffic, the colleague who takes credit for your work, or the friend who betrays your trust. These situations are like fires that can either forge us into stronger beings or consume us in flames of anger. The difference lies not in what happens to us, but in how we choose to respond. The ideal response, bearing life's accidents with dignity and grace, isn't about suppressing genuine emotions or pretending that hurtful situations don't affect you. Rather, it's about developing the remarkable ability to experience these emotions fully while maintaining your inner equilibrium. It's about becoming like the mountain that stands unmoved even as storms rage around it. Think of dignity as your internal compass that maintains your direction regardless of external chaos. When someone insults you publicly, dignity allows you to respond not with matching hostility, but with a measured calm that speaks volumes about your character. Grace is the outward expression of this inner dignity, the ability to move through difficult interactions with poise, neither dragging yourself down to the level of provocateurs nor allowing their actions to diminish your self-worth. Consider the story of Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 27 years of imprisonment without harboring bitterness toward his captors. When asked how he avoided becoming consumed by rage, he famously remarked, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." This exemplifies the power of responding to life's harshest circumstances with dignity and grace. You might wonder, isn't this approach passive? Doesn't it mean allowing people to walk all over you? Quite the contrary. Responding with dignity and grace requires tremendous inner strength. It means choosing your responses deliberately rather than reacting impulsively. It means setting boundaries firmly but respectfully. When someone attempts to provoke you, responding with dignity might involve calmly stating, "I understand you're upset, but I won't engage when spoken to that way." This response maintains your standards while refusing to descend into an unproductive emotional exchange. The practice of bearing life's accidents gracefully begins with perspective. When facing a triggering situation, pause and ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years, in 5 months, even in 5 days? Most often, the answer is no. The meeting that ran late, the thoughtless comment, the small slight. These moments rarely deserve the emotional energy we invest in them. By widening your perspective, you can immediately reduce the power these incidents have over your emotional state. Another powerful technique is the practice of reframing. When someone behaves in a way that provokes anger, try to imagine what circumstances might be driving their behavior. The rude cashier might be working a double shift because a colleague called in sick. The friend who forgot your birthday might be dealing with family troubles. This doesn't excuse poor behavior, but understanding potential causes helps you respond with compassion rather than anger. Developing emotional elasticity, the ability to bend without breaking, also requires self-awareness. Learn to recognize your emotional triggers and the physical sensations that accompany them. Perhaps your face feels hot, your heart races, or your breathing becomes shallow. These physical cues provide a vital window of opportunity between stimulus and response. In that space lies your freedom to choose dignity over reactivity. Choosing to respond with grace doesn't mean you never address wrongs or stand up for yourself. It simply means you do so from a place of centered strength rather than reactive emotion. You can firmly state that comment was inappropriate without matching insulting language with more of the same. You can decline unreasonable requests without burning bridges. You can set boundaries without creating unnecessary enemies. The rewards of mastering this approach extend far beyond individual interactions. When you consistently respond to life's accidents with dignity and grace, you develop a reputation as someone who can be trusted in difficult situations. You become the colleague people turn to during crises, the friend sought out for counsel, the family member who brings calm to conflicts. Your presence itself becomes a stabilizing force in chaotic situations. Most importantly, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of emotional reactivity. Instead of being tossed about by every provocation like a small boat in a storm, you become the captain who skillfully navigates through turbulent waters. The journey toward becoming this ideal person, one who bears life's accidents with dignity and grace, isn't completed overnight, but with each mindful response, you move closer to embodying this timeless wisdom. Lesson 7. Fear is pain arising from the anticipation of evil. When we examine what truly triggers our anger, we often discover that it's not the present moment that bothers us, but what we fear might happen next. Fear is indeed pain arising from the anticipation of evil, a remarkable insight that explains why so many of us react with disproportionate anger in situations that don't inherently warrant such intensity. Think about your most recent angry moment. Perhaps someone cut you off in traffic, a colleague undermined you in a meeting, or a loved one forgot something important. In that moment of anger, what were you really feeling? Beneath the heated surface often lies a fear. Fear of disrespect, fear of being taken advantage of, fear of not being valued, or fear of losing control. This anticipatory anxiety functions as an internal alarm system, constantly scanning for potential threats. When you perceive someone's actions as potentially harmful to your well-being, status, or relationships, your mind quickly jumps ahead to anticipate the evil that might follow. Your angry response isn't really about what happened. It's about protecting yourself from what you fear might happen next. Consider how different cultures approach anticipatory fear. Eastern wisdom traditions have long recognized that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our desire to control outcomes. When you release the need to predict and control the future, you simultaneously release the anticipatory fear that fuels your anger. You can begin practicing this awareness in everyday situations. When you feel anger arising, pause and ask yourself, what am I afraid might happen here? Are you afraid might happen here? Are you afraid of looking weak if you don't respond forcefully? Are you afraid this person will continue to take advantage of you? Are you afraid this represents a pattern that will cause future pain? By identifying the underlying fear, you create space between stimulus and response. The paradox of anticipatory fear is that in trying to protect yourself from future pain, you create immediate suffering through anger. Your mind constructs elaborate narratives about potential threats, most of which will never materialize. You're fighting invisible enemies, and this constant battle exhausts your emotional resources. Many of history's greatest philosophers understood this mechanism. The Stoics taught that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about events. Buddhist teaching recognizes that attachment to particular outcomes creates suffering. Both traditions offer a liberating alternative. Focus on the present moment and release anticipatory fears about the future. This doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing others to mistreat you. Rather, it means responding to what is actually happening instead of reacting to what you fear might happen. There's tremendous power in this distinction. When you separate reality from anticipatory fear, you can address situations with clarity instead of emotional reactivity. Practice this separation through a simple technique. When someone's behavior triggers your anger, consciously identify what's factually happening versus what you fear might happen. For example, my colleague interrupted me in the meeting is factual. My colleague is trying to undermine my authority and will continue disrespecting me is anticipatory fear. By distinguishing between these two, you can respond to the actual situation rather than your projections. Your anticipatory fears have been shaped by past experiences. If you were previously betrayed, you may anticipate betrayal in neutral situations. If you were once humiliated, you might perceive innocent comments as potential humiliation. These patterns can be rewired through conscious awareness. Each time you choose not to react from anticipatory fear, you weaken its hold on you. The freedom from anger comes when you realize that most of what you fear never happens. The energy spent defending against imagined futures is energy stolen from living fully in the present. When you release anticipatory fear, you don't just avoid anger. You create space for genuine connection, creativity, and joy. Practice standing in this moment, exactly as it is, without adding layers of anticipatory fear. Notice how much lighter you feel when you're not carrying the burden of projected threats. This is the beginning of emotional freedom, not because the world has changed, but because you've changed your relationship with fear. Lesson 8. Character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. Character is the silent force that speaks volumes before we ever open our mouths. When we explore why some people trigger our anger while others do not, we often discover an essential truth. It is not merely what others say or do that provokes us, but who we perceive them to be. Their character, or our perception of it, colors every interaction. Consider how differently you respond to criticism from someone you deeply respect versus someone you distrust. The same words from different mouths land differently in your heart. This is the power of character in human interactions, and it works both ways. Your character determines not only how others receive your words, but also how you process theirs. When we strengthen our character, we build an invisible shield against unnecessary anger. People of strong character are not easily provoked because they stand firmly in their values. They don't need to defend themselves against every slight because their self-worth isn't hanging in the precarious balance of others' opinions. This is why character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. It convinces without argument. It defends without attack. The person who has cultivated patience as a character trait will naturally respond differently to delays than one who has not. The person who has developed honesty will not be as easily rattled by deception, having no fear of truth themselves. The person who practices compassion will not readily assume malicious intent in others' actions. Each virtue we cultivate becomes a buffer against reactive anger. You might wonder why some people seem unshakable, able to maintain their composure in situations that would inflame others. Look to their character. They have likely spent years building inner qualities that no external circumstance can easily disturb. This doesn't happen by accident. It happens through intentional cultivation of virtues that matter. When you find yourself repeatedly angered by certain people, look inward before lashing outward. What character quality might you need to strengthen? If someone's arrogance triggers you, perhaps humility needs cultivation in your own garden. If another's dishonesty sets you ablaze, examine your relationship with truth and transparency. The qualities that most disturb us in others often reflect areas where our own character could use reinforcement. This is not to say that your anger is never justified. Sometimes anger serves as a necessary signal that boundaries have been crossed or injustice has occurred. But even justified anger is best expressed through the filter of good character. The person of integrity can address wrongdoing without becoming consumed by rage. They can stand firm without becoming rigid, speak truth without becoming cruel. Building character requires daily choices that often go unnoticed by others. It happens in private moments when you choose honesty even when a lie would be easier. It grows when you extend kindness when retaliation seems more satisfying. It develops when you take responsibility rather than shifting blame. These small, consistent choices forge a character that becomes your greatest asset in managing anger. Your character is not static. It is constantly being shaped by your choices. Every time you pause before reacting, you strengthen patience. Each time you seek to understand before condemning, you deepen wisdom. When you forgive, instead of harboring resentment, you expand your capacity for peace. These are not merely tactics for anger management. They are investments in your character that pay dividends across all areas of life. The ancients understood that anger management isn't primarily about techniques and strategies, though these have their place. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally responds to life's provocations with wisdom and equanimity. They knew that character development is the ultimate anger management program. So when you feel anger rising, ask yourself, what would a person of excellent character do in this situation? Then strive to be that person, not to impress others, but because living from a place of developed character brings its own reward, a life less dominated by reactive emotions and more guided by your highest values. Your character is being written every day through your responses to life's challenges. Make it a masterpiece of self-possession, not a cautionary tale of reactivity. In doing so, you'll find that fewer and fewer people have the power to provoke your anger, not because they've changed, but because you have. Final lesson: the ultimate victory. There comes a moment in everyone's life when we realize that true power doesn't lie in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. Throughout this journey, we've explored the intricate landscape of human emotions, particularly anger, that most seductive and destructive of reactions. Now, as we conclude, let's weave together these threads of wisdom into a tapestry of emotional sovereignty. You've likely noticed a fundamental truth emerging from our explorations. Those who trigger your anger hold power over you only when you surrender it. Think about the last time someone made you angry. In that moment, you handed them the remote control to your emotional state. You allowed an external force to dictate your internal condition. This final chapter invites you to reclaim that control once and for all. Consider what happens physically when anger takes hold. Your blood pressure rises. Stress hormones flood your system. Your thinking narrows. In essence, you become a different person, often a lesser version of yourself. The cost is extraordinary, yet we pay it reflexively, as if we have no choice. But you do have a choice. You always have. The ancient wisdom we've explored isn't about suppressing anger or pretending it doesn't exist. Rather, it's about transforming your relationship with this emotion. When you feel that familiar heat rising within you, pause. In that pause, that sacred space between stimulus and response, lies your freedom. Ask yourself, is this reaction serving my highest good? Is it aligned with who I choose to be? What appears as personal often isn't. The driver who cut you off is likely rushing to their own emergency, not plotting to ruin your day. The colleague who criticized your work may be struggling with insecurities of their own. The family member who pushes your buttons does so from their own unresolved wounds. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it liberates you from the prison of personalization. The practice of emotional sovereignty requires vigilance. Notice the early warning signs in your body: the tightening jaw, the quickened breath, the surge of heat. These physical cues are gifts, early interventions that allow you to choose differently before the emotional tsunami hits. By developing this awareness, you create space for choice where once there was only reaction. Consider implementing what I call the 3-breath practice. When triggered, commit to taking 3 full, deep breaths before responding. During the first breath, acknowledge what you're feeling without judgment. During the second breath, consider the broader context and the humanity of the other person. During the third breath, choose your response rather than being driven by reaction. This simple practice, applied consistently, can transform your life. Your emotional responses form the backdrop of your existence. They color how you experience every moment, every relationship, every challenge. By mastering them, you don't just avoid conflict, you fundamentally alter the quality of your life. Think of someone you know who remains unruffled amid chaos, who responds rather than reacts. Notice how differently they experience the very same circumstances that might send others into a tailspin. As you practice emotional sovereignty, you'll discover something remarkable. Your capacity for joy expands. When you're no longer at the mercy of others' behaviors or opinions, you're free to experience life directly, unbuffered by defensive reactions. Colors seem brighter, connections deeper, possibilities wider. This is the unexpected gift of mastering anger. It opens the door to a more vibrant experience of everything else. If you've ever watched children at play, you've witnessed this natural state. They move from joy to frustration and back again with remarkable fluidity. They haven't yet learned to hold on to emotional states, to nurse grievances, to rehearse past hurts or anticipate future slights. We can relearn this natural fluidity, this emotional resilience that was once our birthright. The journey to emotional sovereignty isn't completed in a day, a month, or even a year. It's a lifelong practice, a daily recommitment to your highest self. There will be setbacks, moments when you react before remembering you have a choice. When this happens, extend the same compassion to yourself that you're learning to extend to others. Then begin again. As you close this book, remember that the wisdom it contains isn't truly mine to give or yours to receive. It's a rediscovery of what you've always known in your deepest self. That you are meant to be free, that no one can disturb your peace without your permission, and that in choosing your response lies your greatest power. Go forward not as a passive recipient of life's provocations, but as the active creator of your emotional experience. In this you will find not just peace, but profound aliveness.